Hi all. Today we are continuing lesson 6. In this lesson, we are going to talk about HTTP client. I'm Sajitra Giga. Okay, let's go to the Angular lesson. Okay. Almost all front-end application need to communicate with some backend services to upload, download data and access other backend services. As we discussed in our first lesson, Angular is a framework, so Angular provide relevant and required libraries to do our operations. So, for example, Angular gives the HTTP client API library with their framework that call Angular HTTP client. And this library is inside the Angular common HTTP module. And from here, we will discuss about how to use HTTP client modules and fetching data and things our Angular application. So why HTTP client? This HTTP client gives us the ability to request, type response object, and streamline error handling and testability features and request and response interceptions. Let's move forward. Okay, set up server communication. Before we use HTTP client, we need to import Angular HTTP client module to our Angular application. So most of our application uses this import statement in Angular app module. And also if there is several modules, rather than importing it in Angular app module, we can use them in separate modules. But in our application, we are going to import HTTP client module in our app module. And also there is an important thing, when importing HTTP client module, it always need to import after the browser module. Okay, let's move our code. In our Angular code, there is our app module.ts, which is my app module. And to import HTTP client module, what I had to do is add that module to my import array of the ng module decorator. And as I said, it should import after the browser module. So I type here HTTP client module here. Then I have to import it. Import HTTP client module from Angular common HTTP. Okay, you can now see that my HTTP client module is imported. If you got an error while importing this HTTP client module, it could be mostly because this application is running. When the running state, that import things sometimes may not gather that whether we are change the module import or not. So what you have to do is just stop uh, the running application and run the application again if you got some error. Okay, now we have imported our HTTP client module. Now we can use HTTP client service to communicate with our Angular application with our backend services. To do that, what we have to do is inject HTTP client service as a dependency in our service. Uh, and also, let's again go to our code to describe it. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, in my services, I have a service called item service. In my item service, I have hard-coded item list here. You can remember these things we have done in our previous examples. What I'm going, what I want is, rather than hard coding my item list, I want to get this list from a backend service that returns the item list. So for now, I will get this item list to a separate file. We'll put it here in backend server mocks folder, I will create a new file called item items.ts, and I will add this array here. Sorry, I have renamed this item.json. I want a JSON file to return. Now there's a problem. I have to refactor this JSON file. I will do it in offline. Okay, now you can see I have formatted my JSON file here. Since we are not implementing a backend service, REST service, I'm going to use this JSON as my backend service. So what I'm going to do is I'm trying to get this item JSON from my item service. It's the same as what we communicate with the backend service. Okay. Now to use HTTP client service, we have to inject that client service to our item service. We learned about dependency injection, and how we do is we have to inject that service to our constructor. Here in constructor, what I am going to type is private. I will put my method dependency injection dependency name is as HTTP and type HTTP client. It also important from Angular command HTTP. The important thing is if you want to use this HTTP client service, you definitely have to import the HTTP client module in app module as we discussed earlier. Okay, now we are eligible to use this HTTP client. Now, how can we use this HTTP client? Okay, now let's move to our slide again. And the HTTP client service make use of observables for all transactions. What is this observable? What observable do is it produces multiple values and pushes those values to subscribers of this observable object. For example, if you have subscribed to this observable object, you will get subscribe notification of new values, errors, and completion of this observable with different status. We will discuss this in later. For now, just remember observables are something that pushes values to their subscribers. Okay, now requesting data from a server. For that, there is a several HTTP methods, which are get method, post method, delete, put, and such kind of things. And for requesting data from server, obviously you are using HTTP get method. For that, Angular HTTP client has a method called get. What we have to do is call this get method with relevant parameters. When we talk about our get method, it has two parameters, which is endpoint URL and also options. When we consider about options, these options object contains some other properties also, which is about headers, type called observe, and some params, report progress, report response type, and things. In our observe option, it specifies how much of response to return. For example, you want to get the only the body of the backend service response. So you can mention it as a body. The body is the default value also, and also you want to get the full response of the returning response from backend. In that time, you can use option called response as the observe type. When using the response as observe time, you can access some headers of your response also. And also there's a response type which is mention what is the type of the response you are going to receive. Uh, in our application we are going to get it as a JSON. If otherwise you can use array buffers, blob and text also. And also in your get request sometimes you have to send query parameters with your request. In that sense we can use that params option to send query parameter with it. And then consider about the report progress. This parameter basically used when you are uploading or sending some large amount of data. It reports you what is the progress, or it is listen for progress of the event, and you can get the progress of event by using this report progress parameter. Okay, let's continue. Now I'm going to change my code. Now I'm going to fetching data from my using HTTP client service. And what I'm going to do is, since we are not implemented a backend service which to return my item list, I'm going to get that item list from the file we created, which is in assets folder, be server mux folder, items.json file, which is in here. You can see. Okay. The procedure is the same as access in a backend server. Uh, Sometimes you may need to add headers if there's some header required from special headers required from your backend server. Otherwise, the same as the process. Okay. For now, I don't need this item list array here. Why? I am not going to put any values in item service item list. What I am going to do is just return the HTTP get call observable value from get item list. Uh, for that, what I have to do is return http dot get methods value. And you may remember get method have two parameters, which is my URL and also the options. Here I am not specifying any options because I am getting those detailed options. And for better practice, I will, rather than defining URL here, I will put it here as a variable. So list item URL plus I'm going to put it URL assets can server mocks and items dot json. Okay, my URL is ready. Now I'm going to put my URL here in this. Okay, now my item list is returning the resulting object of this HTTP service get method. As I said, this get method returning the observable here as observable object. So I have to change my app component, which is using this item get item list method in here. So I can't assign this observable object to item list. What I can do is I will put a comment here. Okay, what I am going to do is I can subscribe to this returning observable item list. How I can subscribe this object? Since this item get list return observable, I can subscribe. There's a method called subscribe in observable. I can subscribe, and subscribe method containing a callback function, which we can use to post processing of the get method. And this callback function getting return values which is item list, and we can assign this item list to our items in my app component. Item list of my app component. Okay, what this says. Okay, now the problem is, since we are getting this item list from our backend services, we can't guarantee that it returns the item list as we required here. What it required is item array, but we can't guarantee that this backend service will return the same object as we wanted. What we can do is we can go to our item list and we can define that we are going to get a data as type item array. So to go to now going to your app component, you can see that now the error is fixed. So as a summary, what we have do is I want to get item list from my backend services to my app component. So to get data, I use my item service, which is here. This item service has a method called getItemList, and this getItemList is called to my backend server to fetch data, which is using Angular HTTP client. And to use fetch data, we use Angular HTTP client get method, and we are here mentioning that this get method will return the observable with type of item array, and this get method is written in item array from this URL service, and when get item list called here in app component, it is getting from this section they are getting an observable object, and since it is observable, we can subscribe to that object, and subscriber has a callback function which is written in the fetching data, and it is I mentioned as item list, and in that callback function we do the post processing of assigning item list to the item list of app component. Now, if you go to our Angular application, you can see nothing will be changed, but we are getting data from our backend service. Okay, now that's how we use Angular HTTP service to fetch data. Let's move forward. Request in type request. You can structure your HTTP client request to declare the type of the response object. Uh, when we specify a response type in our code, the type script treat your response as being of the given type, but this is only a build time check because we don't know whether our backend service is going to give the exact same typed object. So it is always responsible of backend server to give the response as declared here, or otherwise you have to change the type accordingly and map those type what backend has returning. So to specify in the response object type, it is required first what you have to do is first declare type. We in our previous examples we learned about how to declare a type. For example, item our item type, which is in here you can see, In item type, there is several properties with different type of several properties, and some are optional. So after we declare such a type, what you have to do is define here. What you have to do is specify that interface as the HTTP client get calls type parameter in the service. In here, I have added and specifying that get method parameter type as item array. And after we give given this type here, you can also mention that our callback function parameter also with that type. It also item array, and this is really good practice to mention this type, because in this post operations, if you have to change your data type, or if you have to do some operations, it is very easy to you to do such kind of operations in the post operation time. Okay, now we know how to use our typed get operations to fetch data in more safer way. And next topic is reading the full response. Sometimes, as I said earlier, you might need more information about transaction than it is contained in the response body. Sometimes server return special headers or status code to indicate certain conditions that are important to the application workflow. For that, what you have to do is in your options object, which we are passing to our get component, you have to mention that observe property as a response. As a default, it is contained as a get, but here what we have to do is mention it as a response. Okay, let's go to our code and see how to capture those header details. In my item service, uh, in this example, I'm not included the options parameter here since it is a optional one. Now I am going to add the parameter options parameter here. So since I wanted the full response here, what I'm going to do is change my observe type to the response. So all other things are as default, and I change my observe type to response. Okay, now I will save the code and you will get a error here. Let it be there, and I am going to my app component, and now this is not the value we are getting. We are not. I will comment this subscribe method for while and add another subscribe method. In that subscribe method, I am getting my response, and let's console log our response here. Okay, now I have console logged my application and it's compiled, and it will console what is returning from our database. Now you can see there is no item since we are not binding items in app component. And let's see what are the printed one. Item list response console here. You can clearly see now the response to the callback function of subscribe, now getting the full response as we discussed. So here you can see the body, headers and status codes and so many details there in a full response button. If we have had the default option, which is observe type is body is the default type. Let's see it again. I will change my item service here response observe type to body. Now it only returning the body of the response. You go there and see. Now you can see response came only the body here mentioning. So that's why we wanted to get in a when we wanted to get in a full response, we have to give the here observe type as response. When at the response as a observe type, it is required here. I will comment it out this otherwise. Now, what I can do is to bind this item list from the response list dot item list equals response dot body. Now you can see my application is showing all items as we wanted. So that's how we are getting our responses, full response. And here is another additional thing I have to say you. That is, in my item service, I included this as a inline object here. But what will happen if I define this as const options and I can copy this, assign it to the my options variable. I will pass it here. Now you can see exactly same thing happens there, but why this options is showing some error? It is because Angular is expecting our observe type to be one of the specific string. But here, since we are defining options as a object, this type is too wide to pass to the HTTP client get method. So as a solution for that, we can use as const to let TypeScript know that you have really do mean to use constant string type. That is how we can do is that we can set this response as a const. Now you can see that all errors are gone and our Angular application is running as we expected. In this as constant, we say const assertion. When we add a const assertion to such kind of string, it says that the observe is type of this response and it is furthermore not treated as any string value. So now TypeScript is pretty much sure that this observe type will not change in the middle of somewhere, and so explicitly this is the observe type. And for example, if I want to change options dot observe to something any value where valid value is body, you may see that you can't do it because it says the type body is not assignable to type response. That is why we called observe is now set as type this string response. Okay, now we know more about using options and how to get a complete response from our HTTP client API. Let's move further in our Angular lesson. Okay, now we are going to discuss about handling request errors. If the request fail on the server, HTTP client returns an error object instead of successful response. And this can be happen in two stages. We can call two types of errors can occurs. One is the server backend might reject the request. And for example, if backend reject the request, it could be a with status code such as 404, or if it is a server error, the status code will be 500 or something. And these are error responses when the server backend might, if server backend rejected our request. And the other thing is could go wrong on the client side. Uh, when we talk about client side, it could be a network error that prevent request from completing successful, or exception thrown in RxJS operations. Okay, we will talk about it later. And now let's go to our code examples how to handle these HTTP request errors. For that, we are using RxJS error catch error function, and I will show you how to handle these things. In item service, now we are only returning the response we are getting, but not handling any errors here. And the RxJS catch error function, what they did is catch errors on observable to be handled by returning a new observable or thrown an error. So let's see how we can do it. In my code example, currently I am returning the success response only, and also the error response also returning here, but we are not handling these error responses. So what I'm going to do is, for that I am using a capture functionality of RxJS. And RxJS catcher functions what did is they catches errors on the observable to be handled by returning a new observable or thrown an error. To handle these things, we can send these to the observable pipe method, and in the pipe method we are forwarding our errors, observable errors in my request to catch error function. Catch error function. We have to import this catch error function from RxJS. Import catch error from my libraries RxJS observable, RxJS for operators. Okay. Now my RxJS function catch error method is imported here. Why there is an array, I should have to pass a argument here, that what argument is expected. And in that argument, if we go to our function, you can see that uh, there is a callback function. You can see that this is a function with two arguments. First one is error type of any and coach observable any, uh, and return in a operator function. So I'm going to implement that callback function here. My first argument is error, and second one is coach. And my return type is, as said, when handling RxJS catch error function, we can throw a new error or return a new observable. So for now, I will throw error here. So throw an error which saying some error occur. Okay, now something happens. This throws error, some error occurs, but even we are not handling our HTTP error. So when we consider about these observable errors, this error status, as we discussed, status code could be 404, 500 or anything, but in as I discussed in our presentation slide, when the client side error happens, something network issue or something, that status code comes as 0. So we can handle these client side issues separately and backend issues separately. So for that, I will check my status code of error status, whether it is 0. If it is 0, this is a client side error, so we can handle it accordingly. For now, I am consoling it, let's console error, which is an error occur occurred in client side. We can give an argument also error dot error, which is containing the error message. If you want to see it, you can console your error here and see this status. And if else, that means this is from the server side error messages, server side error messages, and this error messages is because of some our request error or some server side error. So I will console this error also, an error occurred in server side and the error message. Error. And also if we want, we can status that error status code. This is really needed when you debugging these things. Error dot status. Okay, now those things are handling, and finally I written some error occurred, and let's say please try again later. Okay, now I can say I handled the error, but there's a problem when item service, when we consider about item service, service may contain several backend calls to post items and get items and delete update to items. So various kind of HTTP call may handle in item service. But if we are going to do this like this, we have to write that error handling functionality in each code. So as a best practice, what I'm going to do is I will separate this callback function to a separate method. So I will write it here is private, and let's say handle error and function is those things here. Okay, something. Oh, sorry. I have added it inside my method. Okay, now I am okay with this. Another thing, I have mixed up with two notations. Okay, now what I have to do is call this function from catch error method. Need what's happening now. Now what's happening is this is requiring observable input array as a return type here. I will give here return type as observable any. So since I am throwing an error, this is applicable for observers, and let's see what's happening now. It compiled successfully. And why we are returning observables in our error handling method is that if in some cases of errors we can handle that, we can return some observable instead of this error response, then our application, the chain of this observable event will continue with that observable object. So that's why we return in a observable here. Now my error handling function is completed. And for another example, I would like to add some interesting thing here. When we doing this thing, we can call to our Angular to retry our operations. So I think sometimes fail request may be because of sometimes the network error, sometimes of the state of our backend services. So retrying issues sometimes may trying to gain you a successful result. So how can we retry our result? Is RSJS library also giving you this kind of features also? There's a method called retry, and it's requiring one argument. I want to retry, and it's required in count number. Uh, it asks me how many times do you want to retry this operation. If I put it 2, it will retry this operation 2 times, and if that 2 times also doesn't give any effect, then it go to the catch error function. When you are working with some uh, backend services, this would be a something interesting. It is automatically retry our operations for sometimes some in the as this example it's 2 times, and after only after that it's handling the error. So that means it is waiting for 2 times for successful result. Okay, now we are handled our errors, and if we want to see what's happening here, we can go to our Angular application again, and I will clear my console and go to network tab. Let's see. Yeah, I will clear network tab also. Now what I'm going to do is this error handling function works. For that, what I'm going to do is, since we are requesting this items.json from this get items call, I'm going to rename this file. So I will rename that files to items underscore one. Okay. Now there is no such a file to access to this uh, HTTP call. Now I'm going to my browser and you can see still there is getting some values that because the caching. So I will stop my application and run it again, because when Angular is compiling these things, these assets are also getting as compiled. So I will rerun my application. Now what's going to happen is, since there is no such a item, this Angular application is should use as a network call errors. Okay, now we are getting errors, but for now I will clear all these network tab and console and I will refresh it again. Okay, now you can see there's a get call. If you open it, the request method type is get, and it's also requesting the resource call assets item.json, but there's no such a thing. So 404 error status code comes, and there's another two failed requests. What are these two failed requests? We are trying to get in one, only once we call this item.json. These two is a retrain status. So if you can remember, we added the retry to here. So when the application fails, it retries the HTTP call twice again. So that's the mention in here. And if you go to console of our application, you can see that console log also there's a tree failed method, and after all tree fails, you can see that an error occurred in server side message, and the error also there, and it mentioned that cannot get this particular JSON file, and error status code also showing here, it 404 resource not found status code, and also here is some error occurred, please try again message, which is we thrown from our error handling function. Okay, now you can see how to handle errors, and let's go to our next example, how to post or how to send data to our servers using Angular application. Discuss about sending data to server. In previous example, we are discussing about fetching data from a server using HTTP GET method. And now we are going to talk about HTTP POST method. Okay, let's move to our code. I will close all these tabs and I will open my cart service. What I am going to do is I want to save my cart. So in that case, I have to send this cart details to my server. To send such a data to server, HTTP POST methods. So in Angular, HTTP client service also support HTTP post method, and to implement that, first we have to inject our HTTP client service class to our cart service. So how to do is, as previously in constructor, we have to inject our HTTP client service. HTTP client service. Okay. Now we have inject our client service, and now I am going to write my function here, which is save cart function, and this function is getting details as item list or cart, let's say cart, and cart type is cart item array. Okay, now in here I'm going to write my method here, which also I am returning the observable object here, return calling this dot http. In previous example we used this get method, and now we are using this post method. In post method it required three parameters, which is URL and the data body, and also the options as previous example. And as a better practice, now I am defining my save cart URL, and for now there's no backend service to send data, so I will keep it empty. And why I am saying this as a better practice, the best practice is using this all as a configuration. I will show you it later. For now, for learning about HTTP client, this is well enough. So I'll define in cart URL here, and my post method save cart URL, and also I have to send the body details here. My backend service requiring the array list of cart items, so I can directly pass these cart items to my backend service. I am assuming it. And also the options is optional here also. Since I'm using the default options, I don't add any options here. And then as previous, what I can do is to catch or handle errors. For that, I will add my pipe here and catch errors. Catch errors from RxJS. Okay, RxJS is important. So now, as previous example, we have to also add that HTTP error handle function here. So I will go to my item service and I will copy this function here also, and we have to import observable from RxJS. Call this handle error function. Now my post method is completed, but you see that there's a handle error method in my cart service, also item service. This is something of code duplication, so we are not recommend this kind of practice in Angular. So it is better to have this error handle functions in separate shareable file. So in Angular, as we learned, the services are the best way to communicate with unknown components and services. So what I'm going to do is I create another service. I have already navigated to Hello World source app services folder, and now I'm creating ng generate service, error handle service. My service is error handle service. When it created, you had to add this service also to app component providers array. Okay, now it's created. Now I will copy my service class name and put it here. Now it need to import our handle service. Now it imported. Now we can use our error handle service. Okay, in my error handle service, what I'm going to do is add this error handle method. Okay, in this, when we consider this method, since it is accessible by other services, I don't want to make it private. Should be a public method, and I import RxJS here. Okay, now my error handle function is created. I will go to my cart service, and now what I have to do is delete this method, and now error handle is showing here. It's showing an error. What I can do is what inject that error handle, my error handle service here. I will name is that error handle and import error handle. Error handler, is it? Should be error handle service. I didn't see a suggestion here, so I add it here and import it there. Okay, now error handle service is imported and dependency injection is done, and what I have to do is call this error handle error method from this error handle service. Not error handle dot error handle error method. Now it's okay. Now I can remove this handle error functionality from item service also. What I have to do is the same thing where I did in part service. Now private error error handle service. Important dependency injection is done, and what I have to do is this dot call error handle and handle error methods. Now my code is finally working, and you can see that my application is running as expected as before. No errors in console. Now you see that how to reduce our code duplication also using this uh, services. It is relevant to Angular services, but we also learn it here. Okay, now we learn pretty much things about HTTP services in Angular provide from Angular common HTTP library. Okay, let's conclude our session. Thank you.